Welcome to another episode of Electable. I'm Deb Chubb, and today we are very honored to be joined by Sheila Kennedy. And I'm going to read this great biography because it really is comprehensive, I think, and well deserved. So Sheila is an emerita professor of law and public policy at the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University, otherwise known as PIA. Until her retirement, she was a faculty fellow with both the Center for Religion and American Culture and the Tobias Center for Leadership Excellence, an adjunct professor of political science and founder of the university's Center for Civic Literacy. Prior to joining the faculty in 1998, she practiced law in Indianapolis, including a stint as corporate counsel for the city of Indianapolis from 1977 to 1980, when she left to become the Republican candidate for Indiana's then 11th congressional district seat. From 1992 to 1998, she was executive director of the Indiana ACLU. And she is the author of 9 books, I guess now 10, and numerous academic articles, and publishes a daily, widely read blog devoted to politics and public policy, which I enjoy all the time. So thank you so much, Sheila, for joining me. This is great. You have such a terrific background. You have done so many great things.
I'm very old. That's why.
Eventually, you have to do everything.
Yeah, that's it.
But today, we're going to talk mostly about your new book,
Yes.
which has just been published, which, I had to really, fight to get my hands on. And I'm going to put it up here. It's called, let's see if I can do this. From Property to Partners, I can't read it backwards, Women's Progress and Political Resistance, written by you and Morton Marcus, a well-known economist in Indiana. So, he's done a lot of great stuff on social issues. In fact, I know of him because I spent many years working in early childhood education, and he did a lot of work on the economics related to accessibility of affordable, high-quality childcare, which I very much appreciated. But today we're going to be talking about, it's a great historical review of the women's evolution, the women's movement, but more than that, really technical and political and legal developments that have moved women forward and backwards throughout the entire history of this country. So all right, I want to get right to it, Sheila, because one of the points that you bring out, and this is all about abortion, and one of the points that you bring out very early on in the book is the relationship between white nationalism and misogyny. So, and the history of that in this country. And so can you elaborate a little bit on, your thoughts on that part of the book?
Sure. What we're facing right now, and not just women are facing this. I mean, it's all bound up in my view, and I've done a fair amount of research on this. We are experiencing what one columnist called a primal scream. Older white Christian men who have been accustomed to having a privileged place in the social order, who have been accustomed to enjoying their status, looked around and said, well, my goodness, I mean, there are these uppity women who are running companies, and there are there's Black people everywhere who think they're my equals, and there are gay people getting married, and they are frantically trying to turn the clock back to, I don't know, 1950 perhaps, when people who were white and Christian and mostly male were the undisputed rulers of the place. And all of that is, we're seeing all of that work through. It is not just a war on women. It is a war on social change, on inclusion. You see the DeSantis hysteria over woke, woke being inclusion. And you see the Indiana's abysmal legislature attacking business that wants to take into account measures of inclusivity and diversity. This is, you mentioned in your introduction that I used to be a Republican. It was a very different party. But one of the things that the Republican Party believed when I was a member of it was that you didn't interfere with business. And I believe Barry Goldwater said, government should stay out of my bedroom and my boardroom. Well, today's Republicans want government both places. And certainly the old Republican Party, the sane Republican Party, was not totally anti-regulation, but they really did believe in respecting the right of businesses to make decisions about where to put their money and how to handle their advertising without government interference.
And there's been more and more of that lately. There's been a lot more writing on that too, about, the Chamber of Commerce used to direct the legislature, the Republican legislature. And now, no, they don't give a hoot about what business thinks anymore.
Well, what we have in our state legislature and in several other states, we have a very unrepresentative legislature thanks to gerrymandering, which is another whole issue. But right now, I think what our legislature is doing is against the clear preferences of even the Republicans. I mean, we see that when Kansas and Kentucky have referenda on abortion, and easily the pro-choice position prevails. These are not representative legislatures. They're just not.
Right. And it said, and it was so great to see around the country all the ballot initiatives. There was some filibustering going on. Of course, there was some challenging to gerrymandering, all three of which are not allowed in Indiana.
Yes, we have a particularly difficult road to hoe because in Indiana, the only people who really can change gerrymandering are the people who benefit from it. Right. So in the absence of massive turnout that is enough to overrun the presumably safe districts, or a federal law that outlaws gerrymandering, we're unable to do anything about it. But anyway, let's get back to it's so
right. So yes, back to the white nationalism and misogyny.
Yes.
So how did that, tell me how you kind of came to that kind of connection.
You read my blog. I've been talking about this for quite some time. I mean, it really, if you read history and you read the pronouncements of some of our contemporary public figures, it's not hard to see that all of that is bound up. When we talk about white Christian nationalism, that subsumes racism, misogyny. What's that meme that goes around? Haters are going to hate. I mean, these are people who feel threatened, terribly threatened by social change, by the nerve of women and African Americans and gay people to think that we're equal citizens. So I mean, I think it would be harder to deal with misogyny as a isolated thing, because it isn't. I mean, the minute you look at the pronouncements of these folks, you see those connections. You connect those dots.
Well, and in fact, you quote Maura Donegan from The Guardian, and there's one little part of that quote that I thought was so interesting. It says, misogyny is often the first form of right-wing radicalization. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think that's hyperbole or really? I mean, That's, I mean, that's a pretty heavy.
But I think what she's looking at is something that we also addressed in the book, which is the very important role of religion in keeping women subservient. You know, that the title of the book is From Property to Partner. And we're not full partners yet. We may be junior partners, but we were property. And there are still several religious bodies that believe that women should, they would say they're not unequal, they just have a different role. And that role that they prescribe for the woman is to be supportive and submissive to the man who has the evidently God's permission to run the household and the world, you know. So we go through in one of the chapters the variety of religious beliefs that underlie approaches to feminism. And for example, Quakers have been in the forefront of women's emancipation. The Jewish community has been also, along with the Quakers, but then you get into the Southern Baptist denomination, and you see an absolute, I don't know if it's an inability or an unwillingness to modify those original beliefs about the role that a proper woman, that God wants a proper woman to play.
So, and then, you know, and this kind of brings up the political part. You know, the fact that all of this has, you know, religion has become political, has become so political. And
Yes.
that's, you know, that's the evolution that you kind of describe in the book about the Southern Baptists who, and just as recently as the 1970s, you know, adopted resolutions that provide women with options for abortion, you know, in many, many cases. But then that changed, right?
Yeah. That change was entirely political and strategic. For about 6 years after the decision in Roe v. Wade, the Southern Baptist denomination, actually, they put out a statement saying it was a well-crafted decision and, you know, drew a proper line. What, I don't remember the exact terminology. It was when Jimmy Carter's administration refused to allow the people who were donating to segregation academies to deduct those gifts, that the right-wingers wanted to get rid of Jimmy Carter and realized that they could, you know, what they looked to see what it would take to get the evangelicals, who had been pretty non-political up to that point, out to the polls. And they quite rationally decided that a movement founded on we have a right to segregate probably wasn't the way to go. So right. they hit on abortion and those babies that are being killed. This was entirely new. And, you know, as we were doing our research, I talked to clergy who were both those who consider themselves pro-life and those who consider themselves pro-choice. And they agree that, you know, the Bible is basically silent on this. It's, and up until, as I say, about 6 years after Roe, so were most Christian denominations. The change occurred as they were able to sell evangelical Christians on this notion that abortion was murder of these babies, and for now the 50 years in between Roe and Dobbs, those people went to the polls, I hate to say this, but religiously, and were adamant that you know, that their religion somehow demanded or commanded that they oppose abortion. It was a really cynical and very good strategically. It was a good move because it really was it gave them the ability to turn out voters who otherwise might have stayed home.
Well, and it's a sad example of using religion to support your financial success. I mean, because that's what it was, right? It was all about it was all about the tax deductions and the ability of religion of churches to raise money and you know, you know, make themselves wealthy.
But it was more
Without
than
government
it's
interference.
power.
Yes, yep.
It was a way to maintain political power that they might otherwise not have had.
Right. So, and then as you point out in the book, the rise of the evangelical, which I think is coming to be known not necessarily as a religious position, but as a political position. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting. Just this morning, I get the newsletter. I get everybody's newsletter, but I get a newsletter from Pew, and they confirmed this morning. The newsletter had the data from a study that shows that increasingly the people who self-identify as evangelical don't go to church. And as we said in the book, the term evangelical has been appropriated by people who are simply very, very right-wing, even if they are not at all religious, as most of us would understand being religious. It's part of this polarization of the United States voters. And evidently, the cult that is now the Republican Party, which really bears no relationship to the party I once belonged to, that cult defines itself as evangelical. But I have a couple of friends who are evangelical ministers who would certainly offer a riposte to the notion that these people are following evangelical theology. They're not. Once again, it gets back to a racist and misogynistic reaction to social change.
Right, and a power grab.
Yeah,
that's what it's. Yeah. So, all right. So I want to move along a little bit, and you and you have done this before when we've talked, and you've got it in the book. You do a great job of really kind of describing what's become known as substantive due process. And that's really what was the underpinning of
yes.
Roe v. Wade, and finding a constitutional right for women to get an abortion. So help us with that. Talk about that, because it's not, those words are not in the Constitution. It doesn't say substantive due process anywhere.
People like to talk a lot about the right to privacy. What they're talking about is substantive due process. When I hear privacy, I think of somebody looking through the window. So I think it's a little bit misleading as a word. But when we talk, whether you want to call it privacy, whether you want to talk about it as substantive due process, what it is, and the Supreme Court was first very explicit in, I think it was 1967, when the case came from Connecticut, challenging a law that said pharmacists could not honor prescriptions, and doctors could not write prescriptions for contraceptives. And what the court said was, look, the 14th Amendment and the due process provisions of the 14th Amendment operate to draw this line between what government can and cannot do. If you take a look at the entirety of the Bill of Rights, what it is a list of things that government can't do. It isn't a matter, when we talk about birth control or abortion, it doesn't say what the answer should be. What substantive due process meant and means, in my view, is that there are certain areas of our lives that are our decisions. The question that is answered by the whole Bill of Rights, and especially by substantive due process, is who gets to make this decision? The person involved or the government? And over a 50-year period, the court has repeatedly said, yeah, you get to decide who you marry. You get to decide whether you're going to have kids, whether you're going to use contraception, whether you are going to abort within that first couple of trimesters. The government does not get to tell us what book to read, what prayer to say, or to pray at all. I mean, there is a line drawn by our constitutional system between appropriate government action and intervention and inappropriate. And the right to personal autonomy, the right to make your own life decisions, is what is protected by this doctrine that we call substantive due process, or the right to privacy. You can, whichever term you prefer. But it was very clear that government doesn't get to make certain decisions that the court has historically called intimate. That was the basis upon which they said same-sex marriage had to be allowed. That government, I used to tell my students, government is supposed to butt out of your soul. You get to determine the telos of your life, which is telos being what philosophers call your beliefs about the meaning and ends of your particular life. Those are not appropriate areas for government to invade. And, just sort of as a side thing, I was amazed at all of the right-wing anger about the government telling us to wear masks. Government gets to do that because you're protecting public safety. If the old-fashioned libertarian principle was that government had to allow you to do your own thing until and unless you were harming the person or property of someone else, and so long as you were willing to give an equal liberty to everybody else. That is the principle that really underlies our whole constitutional system. And this court right now has ignored and evaded that. The Dobbs decision simply ignored substantive due process and said that the government had the right to make decisions for individual women, and that the woman no longer had that right. And that was
the question I want to ask. Do you think that Dobbs really did away with substantive due process? So when you think about that principle being applied to, other areas, yes. I mean, do you think that Dobbs really undid that concept?
It was the first shot over the bow. I certainly, if the court continues in the way that it has been going, we would look back later and say that was the place where they decided to dispense with what had been a foundational constitutional principle for something like 57 years. And I find that more terrifying than just the actual Dobbs decision, when you simply look at it as an overruling of Roe v. Wade. If they're overruling Roe v. Wade, that's bad enough. But if they are dispensing with substantive due process, we don't live in the same America I grew up in.
Right. So now this is interesting because it really leads to the next topic that I want to talk about. And we'll get back to the book, I mean, as much as you want, because there's a lot of great stuff in there. But So if now the government, there is not that line, that red line, where the government can tell you what to do, and you know, and that even if your religion, um, you think exempts you from this law, then because when you think about it, well, okay, so what happens now if we get a different court and the court says, well, yeah, okay, so no more substantive due process, and you know what, we don't think religious people should be getting any deductions, we don't think they should be tax exempt, um, because I don't think they're doing that much for society, and we don't like the way they're operating. So then, kind of turns the tables on the whole argument of staying out of my religion, staying out of my, intimate moments. And
You
so,
know,
go
you
ahead.
remind me of a saying that when I was at the ACLU, the national head of ACLU used to say, poison gas is a great weapon until the wind shifts.
That's right.
And what you're describing is a potential shift of the wind. I used to argue with pro-life folks and say, the government that can tell you you can't abort tomorrow can be like China and tell you have to. The issue is not abortion, it is government power. And until people understand that and understand the multiple ways in which this new ability of government to control our lives can manifest, it's pretty scary.
It is. So that brings me to this next topic, and that is the second case that ACLU filed against the Board of Medical Examiners, or who is it now, it's the Medical Licensing Board, and based on RFRA. So and I'd love it if you gave us your little history of RFRA. I mean, it because it's the interesting thing that now, of course, has created this pile of poop that maybe somebody has stepped in who didn't intend to.
Well, it's another another example of poison gas.
Right.
Or as some people say, karma is a bitch.
That's right.
RFRA was, first of all, the national RFRA was I don't want to, it gets pretty complicated, but the idea was that before you told religious folks that they had to do X, you had to exceed a higher bar. You had to have a very compelling reason to overrule somebody who was acting on, and if I hear sincerely religious one more time, I might throw up. But so that was the national, and it really the case that created the national approach was a zoning case. I mean, it was yeah. But here in Indiana, our depressing legislature, under the clear leadership, I guess, of Mike Pence, passed a version of RFRA, which was slightly different than the national, and that was widely seen as an effort to allow religious folks to discriminate against gays and lesbians. And those of us who were in Indiana at the time will remember there was a huge outcry. Businesses throughout the state really criticized. I remember even the Indianapolis Star had a front page that just said, "Fix this," and in huge letters. So it sort of got fixed, and there was a denial that it was intended to do what it clearly was intended to do. And, so it was slightly modified. A lot of cities in Indiana then passed local ordinances to protect gays and lesbians from discrimination, and it sort of died down. What the ACLU has done is say, okay, RFRA, if it does anything, says you cannot impose on sincere religious people a duty that is inconsistent with their religion. And for example, I am Jewish. In the Jewish religion, the pregnant person has is morally considered more important than the fetus until the head emerges from the womb. In other words, a Jewish pregnant woman who is ill, whose doctors say has to be aborted, whatever, in our religion, it's not that the fetus does not have moral status. It does, and it's certainly not taken for granted. But our religious beliefs allow abortion. There are other religions that are similar that allow abortion. So what the ACLU has said is that the law or the ban that was passed by Indiana's legislature violates RFRA. I would go further and argue that it violates the First Amendment religion clauses. But be that as it may, I mean, it is very clear that to the extent that that ban is allowed, it is what it is doing is effectively compelling every woman in Indiana to abide by the religious beliefs of some, but certainly not all, Christian denominations, which, right, again, in my view, not only violates RFRA, but violates the First Amendment religion clauses. So that is that case. And I have high hopes for that case because I cannot imagine a compelling argument against it.
Great. So yeah, let me just give a little background. So first there was the ACLU's challenge based on just, Article 2, right?
Right.
Everyone's Indiana's Constitution that says all people, not just men, all people are entitled to inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's kind of a paraphrase. I've left out a few words, but that is a violation of Article 2 of our Constitution. Mm-hmm. And that one is still pending. A decision may be coming soon. I'm not sure. So that went to the state Supreme Court, and it was argued, and now we're just waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court. And it was also enjoined with a very good order of injunction that I was very impressed with from a judge in Owen County, whose name I keep forgetting. Anyway, and so that case is pending now. And then after that, ACLU filed this second case based on that the abortion ban in Indiana is a violation of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Yes. And they have a couple of great little standards, that are included in this law that says that it has to be both the state, if you make a prima facie case that the law requires you to modify your behavior that you were following because of your religion, that the state then has to come back and show both a compelling governmental interest and yes, that their law is the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling interest. Mm-hmm. And it applies to criminal laws and everything. So we've heard of this in legal history, right? Where the Indians wanted to smoke. I'm sorry, that's not. Native Americans wanted to smoke peyote, which was an illegal drug. And, in the Supreme Court addressing that. There was a case recently with a guy who wanted to grow a beard in prison, which was against the law, but it was his religious thing. And the court said, of course, that's your religious thing. You don't have to comply. You don't have to shave your beard. So there are lots of instances like that. And so this one, of course, is the abortion one. And as you said, they have these 5 named plaintiffs. Well, they're anonymous, but 5 plaintiffs, and they are seeking class action status so that they will represent all Hoosiers who are similarly situated as these particular plaintiffs who are saying that they have modified their behavior due to this law and that violates their religious beliefs. And so, as you said, you have to show it's a sincerely held belief. And you have to show that you've modified your behaviors. And these women are saying, yes, I do not have intercourse with my husband anymore, sexual intercourse, because I am afraid that I will become pregnant and will not have the ability to follow my religion in obtaining an abortion if that is appropriate in my situation. And another woman, says that she's using birth control that she never would have used before, and that she's changing her behavior in that way. There's a couple of other plaintiffs in there, Unitarian Universalist, who says that her religion says that women are just the center of power and energy, and that that their religion celebrates that bodily autonomy of everybody, and so not being allowed to have an abortion violates their rights as well. The state came up with a bunch of crazy, arguments, none of which this judge bought. In her, this is actually Heather Welch from Marion County, who did this injunction order, which I'm very excited about too. And like you say, this looks like a really good case of the wind shifting and the poison gas going the other way. And so the RFRA also requires that there be a case-by-case consideration of religious exemptions to these applicable rules. Of course, the state was trying to argue that, well, they've argued first that, none of these women are actually pregnant right now, so it doesn't count. But the law actually, the RFRA actually allows that. It says a person whose exercise of religion has been substantially burdened or is likely to be substantially burdened by a violation of the statute can assert that the violation or impending violation as a claim or defense in the judicial or administrative proceeding. So they've really kind of, I don't know, they tried everything, but none of it seems to have stuck. And so one of the things I really want you to talk about concerning this case is the Hobby Lobby case. And you made such a great point about the whole corporate veil being busted, but we'll put that aside for a second. But I love that point. I think that's really important. But who'd have thought that case would turn out to be this important? So maybe if you could kind of talk about the Hobby Lobby case and how that connects with this case.
Well, one of the ways it connects, and it's not a way that I had originally understood, it's the same judge, it's Alito, who obviously has an agenda. Hobby Lobby, which is a corporation under the ACA or Obamacare, was required to include in their health plan for their employees coverage of contraception. And the shareholder, the majority shareholder of the corporation, said this violated his religious beliefs, even though under the ACA it didn't cost him a penny. But I don't know, he was I suppose wouldn't sleep well. Who knows? And the court allowed what we call the piercing of the corporate veil for this one purpose, to allow this religious major shareholder to deny contraceptive coverage to all of his employees, many of whom had religious beliefs that certainly allowed them to use contraception. It was a shocking case at the time, but what really shocked me was then recognizing the fact that that was Samuel Alito, and he was setting out his essentially religious beliefs in the law of the land, which he has now followed up with. And let me say, and the book does go into this, the Dobbs decision was an enormously dishonest decision. It picked language out of context. It cited things from like the 1700s. I mean, it was a profoundly dishonest read of the law, of the appropriate my mind's going, the laws that needed to be followed. So what we're seeing right now is the ability of a religious fundamentalist to impose his view of of God's will, I suppose, on a secular country by misquoting, misunderstanding, issuing a decision that was full of legal holes, but it's the Supreme Court. What we don't get into in the book is the current problem that we have with the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And we don't have time in this podcast, nor do I have the intellectual RAM to bring out all, but something will have to be done to bring the court back into a place where most Americans will once again respect its legitimacy. Because if there's anything that Alito has done, it is to put a great big hole in the respect and legitimacy of the Supreme Court.
Right. Well, we hear Elena Kagan talking about that often. Yeah. About, and she said it in the Dobbs case, initially, that this will very much undermine the legitimacy and the authority of the Supreme Court. And I think she's right. But like you say, it's the Supreme Court. Where do we go from here?
Then we have found that there are no ethical constraints either. So yeah, we're at a point where stare decisis, which is the rule that the court must issue opinions that are consistent with past opinions, has been thrown out the window. So we got lots of trouble here in River City.
We do. Yeah. And you talk about that in the book too, that this is a particularly chaotic and transitional time that we're living in, and so it's uncertain for sure, but that we see that this is happening and that we know what's going on. We're all obligated to fix this. But a point I wanted to make too about Hobby Lobby was that this Judge Welch in Marion County relied on Hobby Lobby a lot in her order issuing the injunction against the abortion ban, until, of course, they can do a full argument. And so I thought that was really interesting that she really relied on Hobby Lobby. And
I'm going to have to read that. I have not read her decision, so that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very good. Interesting. And here's like one little snippet. That the Supreme Court already recognized in Hobby Lobby that the question of when life begins is a religious one that the state may not answer legislatively or as a factual matter. So, again, the poisonous gas has shifted. It worked for anti-abortion, anti-women, corporates before, and now, of course, it may be working against them. So, and this, the nature of this enduring question and the dispute surrounding it are illustrated by the very fact of the competing affidavits of both sides. Clearly there is dispute about when life begins, because of course that was the state's argument, is that life begins at fertilization, and that at that moment the state then has a compelling interest to put this fetus, this handful of cells, over the rights of the woman who is pregnant. So I thought that was really interesting. And so you'll see that in there a lot. And I thought that was really great that Hobby Lobby is, coming back to
the other thing, for coming up to the time that the Dobbs decision was handed down, on my blog, I wrote a couple of times be careful what you wish for, right wing, because I think, and this is really a message that the book emphasizes, I think it emphasizes, which is women have wakened up. You know, before Dobbs, you had these evangelical pro-life people who came to the polls and agitated and all. And then you had on the other side, the rest of us who said, well, you know, it's an issue I care about, but we've got Roe and there are other issues I care about. So it was one issue among many. When Dobbs came down, and I said this would happen, and actually I had a big bet with my youngest son, who is so disgusted. He says, nothing's going to help, you know, but he did not believe that the response to Dobbs would be what it was, and what I certainly anticipated that it would be, which is that women said, hey, wait a minute, you know, that was one issue among many. Right now, it is an issue at the top of my list of issues. And there's been some significant research, opinion research, that shows that women who didn't previously vote have been registering in large numbers, that those people who haven't previously voted are virtually all energized by this issue. So, you know, if we save the country from the current Supreme Court and the Keystone cops that are running the House of Representatives these days, I think it will be women who save us.
Yeah, it will be women. I mean, and there was huge examples of, yeah, women coming out all across the country, you know, and particularly on these kind of, you know, ballot initiatives and, you know, the filibustering. But as you know, I do a lot of work with women in politics, and it was really sad to see that Indiana was kind of an anomaly in that respect. We did not. I mean, even in Indiana, young, you know, in 2022, young people didn't really show up, and we didn't win, and you know, we didn't flip, you know, any significant House seats or Senate seats in Indiana, and voter turnout did not, you know, expand, and even voter registration was just a tiny little uptick. So I mean, but it's happening everywhere else, and you know, we can always hope that eventually what happens everywhere else will, you know, come to Indiana, hopefully. So I want to go to the in your book, you know, in the back, you know, you point out some questions that you hadn't gotten to yet, and so that's great, and I appreciate that, and it really, you know, it sets us up for all the work we have to do. But the question, when you talk about the women's movement, you know, first wave, second wave, third wave, fourth wave, whichever wave it is, you talk about the more modern women's movement having some rifts in it, that it was not as unified as the previous women's movements, and you know, for various reasons, you know, what they were focused on, you know, just voting, and now there's all kinds of issues, and that previous ones, you know, really did leave women of color out of their fight. And so now we've got, you know, more inclusive movement, but that means we have more disparate perspectives and more disparate priorities. And so the question that you ask is, you know, in this most recent women's movement, you know, are there leaders who can cross those fault lines in the movement? And how do their goals and the goals of the various factions diverge? So, you know, of course, I would ask, how can we make them converge? um, so, so I don't know, what do you think about that? Are there leaders? Are there ways for the women's movement? Because in Indiana, we're really struggling. You know, we didn't come out in unity against this ban in Indiana.
Well, you have to realize there are two things about Indiana. One is that gerrymandering is the best way to suppress the vote. I was talking to a young woman, and I can't recall her name right now, who was running in one of these collar counties that is considered safe Republican. And she went door to door, and she said the thing that surprised her the most was the number of people who said, "Oh, I thought I was the only Democrat who lived around here." I think it's so, we're practical people, and we, in Jon Stewart's wonderful words, most people have shit to do, and you don't spend a lot of time doing things if you think there's no point to it. And when what we've got in so many places in Indiana, the Democrats haven't even been putting in a candidate. So why should you go to the polls? I think Indiana is going to be slower to get behind the what I believe to be the inevitable women's movement. But I would want to say we're going to have a woman running for governor, Jennifer McCormick. And I think women are going to come out in droves and support her. And that would be the first step toward Indiana rejoining, like the 21st century, which we don't live in here. But I do think that nationally, I mean, we saw it in the Wisconsin judicial election most recently, where in Wisconsin, elections have been won or lost by a point, and the pro-choice candidate won that by 10 points. I mean, I don't think Indiana may not be the fastest at anything, maybe around the track, nowhere else. But I think the culture is changing, and frankly, I think women and Black people and gay people are changing it. And I read a very interesting book that one of the readers of my blog suggested, that I just finished, by Stephen Prothero, about why liberals always win the culture wars, even when they lose elections. And his point was that the hysteria we're seeing, the hugely angry white Christian nationalist stuff, the anti-woke whatever, those people only come out and start being hysterical when they realize they're on the cusp of losing the culture war. And I think that's exactly where we are right now. Unfortunately, Republicans have been very good strategically in keeping control of systems that have allowed them to exercise political power that the numbers of supporters would not legitimately give them. So, I mean, something like the last time Republicans were in control of the Senate, Democratic senators represented 20 million more people than the Republican majority. I mean, that cannot continue to go on. Now, there's a lot of damage being done in the interim, but I do think that the unanticipated effect of Dobbs, and I think we make this case in the book, is to really set a fire under women voters in the and many men, and not just men who are members of minorities, but nice men like my kid. I have 3 sons who are more feminist than I am. I have a husband who's very much a feminist. I mean, there are plenty of men and plenty of women who have been wakened by this last unfortunate bit.
Yeah. So, and in your book, Morton Marcus disagrees with that forecast, and says, well, he thinks that women will be distracted by these other kind of nonsensical culture war issues that Republicans are throwing out there, like the anti-trans stuff and the anti-LGBTQ plus stuff. And so how can how do you think we can help women stay focused on this and keep their eye on the prize?
I don't think that women opposing those measures are losing focus. That's where Morton and I disagree. It's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the same culture war. I think that women understand that these attacks on trans children, these attacks on gay people generally, all of that is an attack on us. I mean, it's all part of the same war, if you will. And I don't consider it a distraction. And I don't think it will distract from women going to the polls and voting for pro-choice candidates.
Yeah, so I guess that's the question. Are there enough women who believe in reproductive freedom, but don't believe in, LGBTQ rights? I mean, I think those are the same women. I mean, I
They
think
are definitely the same women, because
yeah.
what we all believe in is our right to personal autonomy. And what is the government's, all political arguments boil down to one, which is, what is the proper role of the state? What is government's job? Government's job, in the beliefs that I think motivate most of us, are not to control our reproduction, our sexuality, our government's job is to pave the damn streets and pick up the garbage and keep the country safe from foreign people, and to give each of us a zone of liberty within which we can each make our own way. And so all of these issues that affect the attacks on trans kids, on African American, whatever, all of those aspects of this overall debate are at their base, they are examples of government getting too big for its britches, getting out of its lane, if you will.
Right.
And
right.
I think what we inherently know, because we've lived under substantive due process or the right to privacy for all these years, I think most Americans just automatically think, hey, wait a minute, that's none of government's business. If those trans children are being treated by a medical professional that was chosen by their parents, those parents have a right to direct that childcare. It's not government's job to tell parents what they can and cannot provide to their children. And I think it is ludicrous when you hear we're for parental rights. The only rights that parental rights they're for is the parent who wants to get rid of book A from their children's library and turn librarians into felons. But getting back to the message of the book, I think most women understand that and see these issues as one. And the issue is, what is the proper role of government, and where is government overstepping that role?
Right. Well, and then, one of the, last questions you ask is, what else are we at risk of losing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And, certainly a compelling question, now that we've gotten a taste of what we can lose, we do have to keep thinking about how much worse it might get, if we don't act. So,
Yep.
and we can do it. I mean, I agree, we can do it. We have the numbers, but we have to get those numbers to the polls. So I think we can do it. I hope, and I hope more Democrats win. I've always been, a proponent of always having a Democrat on the ballot. You cannot not put a candidate up. There has to be a choice. I mean, like you said, all that does is drive down voter turnout. I mean, why bother coming out to vote if there's literally no one to vote for? If there's no choices to make, why even bother coming out? So I've always been a big proponent of that, and I think the Democratic Party is starting to come around on that. Because
let us hope.
yeah, let's hope, because they were not too excited about that, which was unfortunate. But I think they are starting to come around. So yeah, that's good. So all right, great. So I think that is all the questions I have for you today, Sheila. I have questions like when you're not around all the time. I should ask Sheila. But there's always fascinating conversation with you.
Well, thank you. Well, tell everybody to please buy the book.
Great. Buy the book, everyone. Just buy the book. So, and I'll probably end up with 2 because I ordered it, and then I think they said they lost it. You want a refund? I was like, well, yeah, okay. And then I ordered it again. So now, but then the original showed up, so now I'll probably get 2. So there you go. So if anyone needs an extra copy,
a Christmas gift.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
They're cheap. They're the ebook is $6.50 and the paperback is $15.
So I think it was 15. Yeah.
So please, people
and
who are
reading
to this, go buy it.
Yeah, great. Great historical information, great thinking, great questions, great discussion. And if you're into the minutia of labor, women's labor participation over the last many years, that is quite well laid out in many charts and graphs.
Yeah. Those are important. Okay.
That's right. That was Morton's part of the book, and so it was really great. So anyway, well, thank you so much, Sheila, for chatting with me again. I always so enjoy it, and so I'm sure we'll be doing this again.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.